Dr. Liquan Liu, a postdoctoral researcher from Western Sydney University. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm so pleased I got your name the first time round. I'm always very particular with that. Uh, now, this is a really interesting topic, looking at bilingual children in particular. How many languages do you speak yourself?
Very limited.
Are you?
Yeah, less than 10 for sure.
Less than 10? Oh my goodness, less than 10. I'm just barely capable with English at the moment.
English is perfect.
Fantastic. So I've heard you speak 9, is it true?
No, 7 maybe.
7, that's fantastic. And how did you learn all of those languages?
Just always through along the way when I travel to a place and start to study or work
Yes.
there, I collect languages, and some of them are collected through hobbies and interest.
Isn't that great? That's fantastic. And what language do you have a personal affinity with? Which one do you like the best?
The ones I like the best, I don't speak very well.
Which ones are they?
Le français for sure.
Oh, le français, see.
And the other one will be Nihongo. So the Japanese, I think.
Yeah,
it's a very
fantastic.
peculiar language that amazes me.
Isn't it amazing? Language
Yeah.
is so, I find it so fascinating,
Yes.
so fascinating. And so those babies that learn another language from a very, very young age, what are the benefits of them learning that second language?
So many, Rebecca.
Great.
So many.
Tell me.
Yeah, the first thing, well, definitely language sensitivity. So their actual sensitivity, sensitive to language. If they're exposed to more than one language, cognitive abilities.
Yes.
They are better at cognitive control, and their working memory is also better. And social communication skills are enhanced as well.
Yes.
They have a flexible brain, comparatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And recently we found that they are even better at musical perception.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Music, just by listening to the language?
So what we did is that we gave monolingual and bilingual babies 2 musical notes, 2 violin notes.
Yes.
They have very subtle differences. What we found out is that bilingual infants paid more attention to, so they actually listened longer to the musical differences. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because
Yeah.
I often describe language, and in particular, like when I'm performing and stuff and having to do accents and things, I describe it as being quite musical. Language it has a rhythm to it and a real pace at which it travels as well.
That's true.
And is it easier for babies to pick that up than it is for maybe adults at a later age to pick up that use of language? Is it easier for them to learn when younger as opposed to learning as an adult?
Presumably, yes. So people always think that babies pick up languages without any difficulty. It's
Yes.
fairly easy. However, there's a recent new view when you look into this issue, because babies do take a long time to reach the full linguistic competence, right? So
Yes.
they are learning all along the way, even at the age of 6 and 8. They're still learning. I do believe that people learn differently.
Yes,
Yeah,
very
so
much
babies
so.
babies and adults, maybe they have different learning strategies.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so is it confusing to learn 2 languages at once? Is it something that really needs to be clear and defined as being this is English and this is a second language, for example?
Yeah, so that is actually a very, very good question. So there are 2 levels. Whether or not it's confusing for the baby, I wouldn't say that
Yes.
it is confusing. We know that they are actually able or capable to compute 2 languages at the same like they can generalize from the two languages as well.
At the same time.
Yeah, and for the mixing, that's a different issue. So I guess your suggestion is about the one parent, one language strategy. So sometimes parents say that, okay, so if daddy speaks English and mommy speaks Italian, then maybe babies will learn better.
Yes.
Interestingly, there are 2 things to discuss here. The first one is that it's kind of exhausting for parents if they stick to it.
Yes.
Recent research from Canada shows that only 9% of parents are capable of stick to this one parent, one language strategy. So just don't force yourself. It's
Yes.
so tiring. Raising a kid is already quite difficult. I mean,
You don't need to add any extra pressure.
no, just be natural.
Be
Yeah,
natural, brilliant.
yeah.
And does it prove? Has it been proven that bilingual babies develop either faster or slower than those that
Yeah.
only speak one language?
Anecdotes always say that they develop slower because they're learning
Right.
two languages. Yeah, research-wise, I really don't think that it's the case. Really, not that I'm aware of. First of all, they pass through the same linguistic milestone, so they have same pace of development. They have same number of lexical concepts in their brain, so they understand same of things, maybe in two different languages.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, in this situation, exposure is the key. We have to remind the parents that you have to talk to babies quite sufficiently in both languages. Be talkative, give them input, give them knowledge. They will be learning at the same pace for sure.
Yes, and it's interesting because Rhonda has just called, and she wants to know that if writing languages has the same effect as speaking the language.
Okay, well, that's a very cool question. Okay, thank you, Rhonda, for calling me. It's really not my specialty, as I was doing bilingual infant research, so
Yes.
babies cannot write yet.
Down,
But
yes.
I would actually predict, even though it's not my, so it's
Yes.
it's only a yeah.
Prediction,
Okay,
yes.
good.
Good.
So just to be clear, I would predict that yes, it will be helping. I think writing. For example, we know that just like languages, right, there are different types of writing systems as well,
Yes.
right? So the alphabetic writing system, like in English, and we also have these kind of characteristic, like what do you call it? These kind of in other languages like Japanese or Chinese, they write very complicated.
Yes,
stuff,
like a symbol or
Yes, symbolic.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I do
interesting.
believe that if you practice different languages, try to write. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I guess so.
interesting.
I guess there will be benefits.
And so you
Yeah.
said that it's the benefit of speaking to the baby constantly. Is it important to make a distinction between the two languages that you're using, or will the child eventually be able to
The
distinguish?
child can tell the difference. Now, okay, so also recent research shows that they actually can differentiate between two languages very early on.
Right.
Yeah, so you don't need to worry about it. They can tell. They are very sensitive actually to the subtle cues in the language. So they are able to actually generalize, create their own mental space for both languages. It's not a problem. Not a problem.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I really wish that I'd learnt a second language. My dad Spanish is his first
Oh
language,
yeah.
but we never spoke it at home because my mum didn't speak Spanish, so it was never a language that was around.
Yeah.
And I wish I could go back and
you can start
learn. I could
now.
start now, but
Exactly.
it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. I must admit, it's very difficult. But part of me wishes that I grew up with it as being just something that is part of life that I could
Yeah.
distinguish myself.
Yeah.
So what is the best way for parents, if they're really keen to do this with their children, what's the best way for them to teach them at home in order to learn this second language?
Yeah, so that is, I am not familiar with the teaching strategies.
Yes.
However, it's once again a personal opinion. I have two things to say. The first one is that the natural way, once again, is the best way.
Yes.
Because we are born this way. Raising a child, as we said, it's not easy. So just go with the flow. Do what's best for what you are most comfortable with.
Yes.
If you're not comfortable, it's not going to work, I think,
Yeah.
eventually. The second thing is that as parents, you can keep an eye and be aware. I did a research on parents' estimation on their children's language background, and we found out that actually parents are the ones who know the best of their children. So parents are very good at estimation. Oh, how much language this and how much language the child knows about that. So
Yeah.
the parents can just keep an eye and then adjust accordingly by themselves.
Yes,
Yeah.
great. And does learning two languages from your studies and from
Yeah.
your research, does it give people a better memory? Does it help with your memory?
Yes, so from an infant perspective, once again,
Yes.
the answer is yes. There are, so if you think about what is language learning and essentially what is learning, learning is merely experience, learning from the experience, learning from memory. memory is part of the learning.
Yes.
Multiple studies have shown that bilingual babies are better at memory generalization. The reason behind it, first, maybe they have better attention. So bilingual babies are more attentive. Or they may form a kind of hierarchical mental representation very early on. And these things are really the result of a bilingual environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what are the other advantages for infants being exposed to a second language?
As we said, there's a flexibility in, for example, they become more abstractive and more flexible thinkers of the world as well. Just like if we quote Shakespeare, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So bilingual babies are very aware of the situation that the rose, if you call it, a rosé when you're drunk or something, it will be the same thing.
Yes.
So if we can play a game with bilingual babies, for example, you say, okay, so now we have a picture of a sun, we have a picture of the moon. So we have sun and the moon, and now all the world, the people all over the world decide to call the sun the moon, and decide to call the moon the sun. What would you call this? And you point at the picture of, for example, the sun, and the bilingual children will say, oh, it's the moon now. But the monolingual children are more likely to stick to this idea.
Yes.
Of course, it's a developmental process, so eventually monolingual will also reach the level that they realize that it's the moon now, the sun is gone. But then it's like later.
That's fantastic. And I imagine that would then also help with communication skills.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I make another game?
Please make another game. These are interesting.
You can actually test with your own kids, right? So if you say, okay, so now there's a duck, and the duck is raised by dogs. This is another research by Crystal Helen from Canada, by the way. So they say, okay, if the duck is raised by dogs, what would the duck say? Would the duck quack quack, or would the duck bark bark? Yeah, monolingual will say the duck. More monolingual will say the duck quack.
Yes.
As what it is in the world. But bilingual will say duck bark.
Isn't that interesting? Because it's almost that the bilingual baby is aware of the impact of language on different things. Yeah.
This really gives them a different level of viewing this world as well, if you think about it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's very this may promote the acceptance of human social and physical diversity on a higher level. It creates a better, more harmonious world.
I'm sure it does. Even just exposure to another person's form of communication is a huge learning curve for a lot of people. And it's interesting about my dad as well, just using the example, learnt to count and obviously his ABCs and everything in Spanish. And it's interesting that to this very day, when he's adding up, he still counts in Spanish. And I remember saying to him, why is that? And he said, well, it was the first things I learnt. As a child, you learn your ABCs and to count. So those bilingual babies that then grow to become adults, if they no longer use one of those languages, does that impact on their communication skills or their memory, like we said it enhances later?
This is actually a great question. But this is a difficult one to answer, to be honest. I do not know much about this field. This is actually called language attrition. So basically, I think it depends on how young you learn that language, and how much you lose that language. So there are different factors. The good news is that I recently checked a case study which shows that if you learn that language at a very young age, even if you lose it later on, when you go to that environment, you can still pick it up very fast. You still gain the benefits.
Yes.
I would say that it's good.
It's good. Yeah. And also for those that wish to learn a language at a later age, for somebody like myself, for example.
Please.
Are there any tips for people that want to learn a language that maybe they're not used to that study, that intense study?
Yeah, so learning a language is like a mental gym, mental fitness, right? It's really good to do. The tips would be, I would suggest to increase social communication. Language is just for communication. If you can learn with someone, if you can talk to someone, and then you can learn through the pace with someone, for example, it will be much easier by just looking at a book, staying at home, or even looking online.
Yes, fantastic. And so how long have you been studying this particular area? It's a fascinating area.
I studied. I started, I think, from 2008.
Yes, fantastic. And
yeah.
have you studied infants around the world? Has it been something that you've managed to see the impact of language?
Oh, that's
in
actually
other
my
countries?
dream.
Oh, is
To
it?
be able to. So I'm now trying to develop, for example, questionnaires that can fit a global setting. So I put this questionnaire on our bilingual website, like bilingualcenter.com. And then and now I'm studied English. I studied bilingual population in Australia, previously in the Netherlands. But I think, given that bilingual has become the new norm, it
Yes.
makes total sense that we are going to expand the study, collaborate with other universities. So we have collaboration plans within Western Sydney as well
Fantastic.
to create a bigger community. So
Yes.
sort it out.
And to
Yeah.
sort it out. Because
Yeah.
I imagine in other parts of the world, I mean, we're exposed to a certain number of languages here, but and this is just me purely guessing, but
Yeah.
would a child being raised in, say, Europe, for example, with
Yes.
exposure to a lot more languages, is that something that is easier for them to learn a second language because of that environment?
Yeah, so research has shown that if the baby starts from learning two languages, he will show more attention, be more attentive to a third language. So that
Right.
could be something that so I would tend to say yes to your question.
Yes.
I do believe that in different worlds, people have different situations. In the place like Quebec in Canada or in Singapore, it's more like a bilingual community. In Australia, I think it's more like an immigration community. In Europe, it's more like because they recently have this immigration as well going on.
Yes.
This situation.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
everywhere.
The exposure.
Yeah.
And has your studies proved at all, because you mentioned working out the mind, it's like a gym for your mind.
Yes.
Has there been any link between the learning of a second or third or possibly fourth language with keeping one's brain active, or perhaps like with dementia, for example?
Yeah, that brings us to this topic of dementia. There's research which shows that if you are bilingual, it delays the onset of dementia for 5 years on average, which is a very large,
Wow.
given that I think in Australia around 500,000. Almost 500,000 people have dementia. You see, but research shows the research tested adults from 35 years to 70 years of age. So it's pretty a large scale study. And then what they found is that if you're bilingual, then dementia will be delayed. But the thing is that when dementia hits you, it hits as hard. You can't really relieve the symptom. But why not have 5 years extra happy life?
Yeah, that's
you know?
right. And is there which part of the brain that deals with language?
This is a very tricky question. Okay, canonically, let's say the left hemisphere is more, but this is not, we can't really say that. If, for example, in an extreme case, we have, for example, so if we have a person who needs to, let's just say if there's a baby who needs to have a surgery and remove, let's say, half of the brain, for example, to the left side of the brain, it doesn't mean that she is no longer able to speak. The language function will switch to the right hemisphere. Human brains.
Human brain is just so fascinating, and all of this is completely tied up in it. So your aim and your dream is to travel the world and do this study. But what next for you here? Where else will this study take you?
This study. So right now I'm looking at the multidimensional benefits of multilingualism. So now I studied musical sensitivity. I hope that in the future I can study the cultural part. So how multicultural environment, what will bring us? What's the benefit of growing up in a multicultural environment?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see the results. It's a fascinating subject.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Liquan Liu, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at Western Sydney University. It's been lovely chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca.